Hello and welcome back to the Leaders in Cleantech podcast. I'm David Hunt, and today I'm delighted to have a repeat guest. It's not something we've done often, but Pete Armstrong, Dr. Pete Armstrong from Mixergy, is a former guest from 2018. It was Pete, which is feels like a million years ago. And of course, everyone knows whether you're an employee, an investor, or a founder, the road to grow a startup is never a linear one. And there have been a lot of changes in all companies, and really fascinated to hear how Mixergy has evolved in that period of time since we first spoke, Pete. So perhaps we can start just as a refresh of a really quick genesis of your sort of creating and founding Mixergy, and where we were when we first spoke in sort of 2018, what the company looked like then, and we can obviously then talk about the evolution.
Yeah, great. No, great to be back on. A lot of water's passed under the bridge since 2018, and so it's great the podcast is still going. Good to check in. I wonder if we'll check in again and around when will it be 2030 something?
Hopefully, you'll be
next
able to
time.
be somewhere.
Yeah. So Genesis of Mixergy was really not long before we spoke in 2018. 2016 was when we officially spun out of the university, and it all came about because Ren and we were looking at ways of delivering low-cost, scalable energy storage to the grid, and we kind of stumbled across hot water as a means of doing that. And in 2018, we were just on the cusp of launching the Mixergy tank. I think we'd just got onto Robert Llewellyn's Fully Charged show, and we then entered a period of interesting times involving some growth pains, some highs, some lows, and we could unpack that over the rest of the show.
Yeah, so essentially it's a spin out from Oxford, as you say, that interesting that when we're looking at, and we'll talk much more about sort of flexibility and the technology in a moment, but you were actually looking at a broader context. You didn't necessarily start by looking at, a hot water tank, which is to some degree what the backbone, I guess, of the Mixergy product.
No, that's right. As a matter of fact, when I started my research, the intention was to go to the Maldives, who were at that time looking to fully decarbonize their energy system. Unfortunately, there was a coup, and so I had all my vaccines and ready to go, my travel itinerary, and then it all fell through. So I was interested from their perspective because they were looking at solar principally around, and how can you accommodate variable solar energy onto their system. Then it became more of a desk project, and was looking at all sorts of different technologies, whether it was different electrochemistries and batteries, flywheels, supercapacitors, superconductors. There's some really interesting esoteric stuff around material science and what you could do with a supercapacitor, for instance, that I got quite excited about. Alas, I don't think that's going to have a scalable manufacturing pathway on the horizon, or at least it didn't then. And at that time, my girlfriend and we had bought a flat with an Economy 7 hot water tank, which was costing quite a lot to run because it was consuming power during peak times. And as I started looking into it, started to understand that, well, we'd actually come up with a pretty decent solution back in the 70s with fuse boards that would switch on storage heaters and tanks to use up base load generation that was surplus at that time. They had a different problem with surplus generation. It was surplus nuclear and coal. And so in a weird way, it came full circle again, and with around hot water storage. And that was the point where I realized, oh, well, hot water tanks, there is a huge amount of potential there, but you have no idea their state of charge. It's quite a dumb approach. You're heating all or nothing. And so that began the exploration around hot water tanks and how we could try and make them better. And that was the genesis of Mixergy.
Interesting journey again for our listeners overseas. Economy 7 was certainly in the UK was essentially a radiator full of bricks that was charged and heated during the day and obviously discharged at night. Essentially, it's a way of heating the room.
Your French listeners might know it as Economy Blue. So they have a very similar thing in France. It's Economy Blue, same scheme. And in Spain, Portugal, they also have they have, I think it's by Horaris in Portugal. So there are other markets where they took this approach to have these sort of fixed periods of time. And the UK did it on quite a big scale back in the 70s.
Okay, let's jump back to that conversation. Company is in its infancy. You've done a lot of research and come to this realization that perhaps hot water was a solution to the problem. How do you go about then looking at scaling the business in terms of the business model and the product evolution? So perhaps we can just sort of focus a little bit on that Mixergy one, and then we can dive very much into how things have evolved.
Yeah, so at the outset, firstly, we needed to get some kind of recognition of the technology and proof. And that came about by launching a direct sales channel in the UK, which targeted the early adopters and came with a bunch of challenges and but also interesting insights at the same time. I think we so some of them quite funny. We got onto this show, this Cleantech show, which had a really good reach with a kind of evangelical early adopter market. And as we went on that show, we got a lot of interest, but quite quickly discovered that the customer journey associated with heating products in general, not just hot water tanks, is very much driven by the installer, their relationship with the merchant, what they're familiar with, what's available. And we were then, and we still continue to today, operate via contract manufacturing. But what we needed to learn was a lot more around how products get specified over the counter as compared with how they get specified when you have a project like a new build development. And so that early start, we learned a lot. We learned a lot about the challenges of logistics, distribution, contract manufacturing,
Many,
customer relationships, where early adopters are a unique breed where you can spend a lot of time talking about elaborate projects, but then converting that to a sale, it comes with quite a high cost compared
yeah,
with an installer who is an evangelical about your product, hopefully, and that's repeat business. So you quickly realize where your focus needs to go in that segment. But even then, we had a network of installers, which we did for a while. That comes with its own attendant challenges, and
yeah.
so laterally we've moved more into the specification realm, where
We'll
it's
touch
about
on that.
achieving, yeah, which we'll come to, yeah.
Yeah, because that's really interesting. When I started our solar business back in 2007, we had the same thing. The early adopters would love to talk about PV for hours on end, but there was never going to be a sale or unlikely to be a sale at the end of it. The other thing, going back to your point of control, is that when you are going through, I should say, the sort of more typical installer network of a customer may come with the idea, I want one of these heat tanks, or even today you put the analogy, I want an EV, but you turn up at the dealer and the dealer says, oh, you don't want that, you want one of these.
That it was exactly what happened to us. Yeah, I mean, almost verbatim. We had people who had seen the show phone us up, agreed to get a mixture tank, and then we were all of a sudden left with the quandary of, well, what do we do next? Oh, let's phone an installer, which we did in their area, and try and list them to help install this tank, only for them to turn up and go, what's this, mate? You want a combi? You want a new combi?
Yeah,
you know? And
do that,
so,
do
yeah,
that like 2 hours for you. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So we accumulated a bit of scar tissue on that path.
That's a really good learning curve. Firstly, because you survive it, and obviously a lot of startups don't make it beyond the first couple of years. So you have all of these challenges in terms of evolving the product, which of course will have evolved over time. But then this route to market, which I guess is one of the other big challenges that has changed. So perhaps let's talk a little about Mixergy 2 then, so the version that is today. So let's perhaps give a little bit more for the audience of an overview of the technology, and then talk
Sure.
about that journey.
Sure. So the technology really centers around stratified hot water tanks, which are installed in the hundreds of thousands annually across the UK. Um, what we decided to do was to try and use the existing manufacturing supply chains as much as possible. So our product to a regular installer, for the most part, looks like a conventional hot water tank and a mains pressurized hot water cylinder. But what we do is we add a few ingredients to make it a smart tank. So one, we add a flexible piece of electronics on an adhesive tape. It's a sensor. It records the thermal energy throughout the tank, and with that, you now know when and when to heat based on the usage that you can learn from the sensor. The other element to it is that we stratify during the heating process. So rather than heating everything from one shot, like you do with a kettle with the heating element at the bottom, we heat from the top, and then we have a little variable speed pump to push cold water from the bottom tank into the top, and then it diffuses, and as it goes through that circuit, it pushes the hot water down. So we could be much more responsive with the heating and heat what's needed to reduce the heat losses, but then also heat when energy is more abundant on the grid, when the carbon intensity and the price is lower. And so those two tweaks, choreographed by the third ingredient, which is our software platform. So we decided to build a full stack IoT infrastructure in house, to coordinate what is now, a fleet numbering many thousands of tanks across the UK, so that we can coordinate them in response to the price of electricity.
So that's the interesting. I think for most consumers, you kind of think of your own, obviously your own house, so to speak. You want hot water for your shower, and you try and charge it accordingly. But what you don't necessarily think of is, firstly, an aggregation of what as you said, that collection or that fleet of tanks is capable of, and the bigger picture of how that can support the broader energy transition and the challenges that we have as we move towards a more of a renewable dominated energy network.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to put it into context, the UK, your listeners will probably be familiar with, but we have a balancing mechanism where each settlement period, half-hour block in the day, you may be in or out of balance. And in the case of the UK recently, we've seen surpluses of energy to the tune of 5 gigawatts of wind, which has had to be curtailed often. Now, if you had 2 million smart hot water tanks, you could soak up those surpluses, the biggest surpluses that arise, rather than, so you can, in other words, you could be paying people to produce free hot water, and 2 million. I mean, that'd be 1 in 4 of the tanks installed throughout the UK. If we could make them smart tanks, then we could deal with some of these enormous surpluses, and that's been our vision since 2016, really, since we launched. Um, but the challenge is, whilst pursuing that lofty ambition, how do you have a tractable customer proposition that can get to the customer at scale? And who is the customer? Because it's actually not really the householder. It's more often an installer or a specifier, or a RMI maintenance engineer who procures equipment for a social housing uh, uh, landlord. So it's getting through that knotty supply chain, which has been as big a challenge as the technical ones, to be honest.
Yeah, well, let's dive with that a bit into that, because again, it's not intuitive necessarily. I think now that a similar concept is there's too much wind at night, you can get paid to charge your car. That kind of electrons kind of make a little bit more sense to people, but obviously achieving exactly the same, potentially better results through hot water isn't necessarily intuitive to a householder, but hopefully it is, from what you're saying, to people who have a more of a professional understanding of the systems.
You're right. I think people. I think it's not intuitive to people the extent to which a hot water tank, allows you to decouple when you use hot water versus when you need to heat the tank. They can preserve heat for a long time with a modern, well-insulated tank. It can store heat at a usable temperature for days. So that means you can be quite opportunistic about when you turn the heat pump or the heating element on. Um, so that once you've got over that intuitive step, you can see quite readily how it can take advantage of flexible time of use tariffs, and and these surpluses that arise.
Yeah, yeah. How have you dealt with that, Pete? Because again, there's a lot of challenges there with, you have you have both the technology to develop, and though you also wear the CTO hat as well, so you have the technology to develop, and then you have what you think is a route to market, interesting from the early adopter crews, and then realizing that actually you need to make quite a substantial change in how you communicate, I guess, the solution to whom you're communicating. So how have you sort of, I guess, dealt with that as coming from a PhD student to a degree to become an entrepreneur to then navigate these choppy waters?
Well, so yeah, I mean, I think it helps having experience around you, and I have sometimes I've gone through moments where in the early days, having a board of investors, you kind of fantasize about what would it be like if I had full autonomy and could do whatever I want, and I think I've frequently concluded, when I'm honest with myself, that it would have gone off the rails quite, we would have gone head first into trying to do more manufacturing, trying to do more distribution ourselves. We'd have made a ton of mistakes. And so I think the realization that we needed to get in external people with different perspectives uh, was very helpful for us. I think and the journey, we started with the early adopters. That served its purpose. It got us onto the radar of Centrica, who through British Gas got us into distribution. Um, but then we needed to evolve again, and that's when we embarked on Mixergy 2.0, which involved us getting David Toohey on board as chair, Andrew Keating as our new chief commercial officer, and with Barclays leading our last investment round. That was really what catalyzed the next phase of our growth.
Yeah. Let's talk about that, because again, you had an interesting cap table to start. I know the guys, obviously, as you did at IP Group, who were one of the early investors. You had obviously that involvement with Centrica, but that level of support as you've evolved in terms of the I guess the wiser heads that come in from a board and advisory point of view, both from the investor side, but also you've mentioned obviously, or David Pinder and others, and obviously now David Toohey, who are in that chair role. How sort of instrumental has that been, and how have you felt about that? Because often as a CEO, as you say, you want to one hand to be, the master of everything you control, but it takes a bit of self-awareness to realize that actually you could end up chasing a few rabbits if without some outside support. So
Oh, it's brilliant. I mean, when you're at the coalface of trying to deal with uh, manufacturing challenges, sales pipeline, you often stop seeing the wood for the trees. It's very to and so when you're forced every month or every quarter to recount the pain of the last month or quarter with people who are seeing different perspectives across different boards, you just get really fresh perspectives along with the experience. I mean, to give you an example, I mean, David Pinder, who now chairs the Green Construction Council and is involved heavily with the MCS, and he from the earliest stages of his chairmanship was made us really focus on the convergence of heat pumps and hot water storage around heat pump cylinders, and that brought us the IHP to market. It was really he was a nagging voice because at that time we were focused very much on the day-to-day direct electric gas-fired systems of the backup heating element. That was tractable, simple, well understood volume opportunity that was there, but there was this growing specification opportunity around heat pump hot water cylinders. So that perspective really helped us there. And then with Mixergy 2.0, getting David Toohey on board, the perspective was about focus. It was about, okay, how can we do something repeatable and scalable? At that point, Mixergy 1.0, towards the end of it, we were kind of all over the place. Frankly, we had a direct sales channel, our own installer network. We were also trying to sell through merchants, which conflicts a bit if you have your own direct installer market. And so the Mixergy 2.0 is really around focusing on the specification opportunities within new build and social housing, and more recently big commercial projects where you're not trying to get so heavily involved with the channel itself. You're trying to leverage the influencers of those channels who pull the product through for you, and keep your focus more in the background. So that we think is a much more viable path forward.
So essentially becoming much more like a tech company than a
Yeah,
product.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, we actually talk about two frontiers of the business, spec and tech. So specification, where the influencers of spec projects are generally quite technical people. It's all about what's my optimum route to compliance through a morass of complex regulation. And so that's around things like SAP in the UK, Standard Assessment Protocol, which are different equivalents across Europe and in the States. And so there's that technical aspect, but then the other technical aspect commercially for us is licensing. So for us to grow beyond the UK, we took the view with Mixer 2.0 that beyond the UK it was about licensing through incumbent players. We used the UK as a testing ground. Uh, we did dabble in direct sales across Europe, and we got our fingers burnt in a few in a few ways. We had some fantastic experiences. We learned a lot, but it's really difficult. Even performing in your own home market with hardware, let alone trying to branch out into in overseas. It really makes me take my hats off to the likes of Sonnen and others who did manage to set up quite a few sales channels in different markets. But for us, much better for us to focus on our wheelhouse, which is the technology.
Yeah, yeah. And how's that evolved? So you've got now this route to market through the specification. Actually, on one part, there's the regulatory side of things. There's obviously the functionality aspects as well. How does that play into the mindset beyond the individual property, be that commercial or residential, to having that, or does it matter whether they have an understanding of this aggregation and flexibility kind of opportunities that exist through hot water?
It so at this stage, from a specification perspective, flexibility still doesn't really have much of an influence. So where we get our influence is around achieving a high score within existing test standards. So, for example, our integrated heat pump cylinder, IHP, that is one of the leading products in a database called the product characteristic database, which is what then drives you into new build specification. Similarly, our solar Mixergy tank, that's about an energy performance score according to SAP, which draws the boundary around the house. It's about how much solar can you utilize uh, by using a solar diverter within the tank. Now, that's not considering the wider opportunity around using surplus energy. That remains our mission, and it's our motivation. But sadly, we haven't seen the the kind of regulatory drive that we'd hoped to endorse flexibility. That being said, it is coming in an indirect sense through new regulations like SSCS, which is a huge piece of regulation around something the government are referring to as the Smart Secure Electricity System, which is going to mandate that hot water tanks, heat pumps, EV chargers, they will have to have by around 2028 the capability to work with a flexible time of use tariff. Um, Now, so that's coming quite late, but nonetheless, it will start to pull flexible products into the market. Uh, to but that being said, there is a huge opportunity with flexible tariffs just with a retail electricity customer proposition. If you can dovetail in with flexible time of use tariffs like a Octopus Cozy, or even just a regular Economy 7 tariff, you can layer in the abilities with Flex on top of the compliance boxes that you really need to tick to get the product installed in the first place.
Yeah. Talk about the scale of this peak, because that's one thing that even when we were first speaking that really sort of struck was because everybody just thinks, yeah, hot water tanks, but you obviously think of whatever it is, 27 million odd homes in the UK and obviously 1.6 million commercial properties. It's just spring to my mind from when I was doing the solar business. There's a huge um, opportunity or capacity or platform of which we can utilize to so much improve the energy system, whether flexibility is, I guess, relatively new topic but increasingly important with what's going on in the world. So perhaps just tell us a little bit from your perspective of the scale of opportunity for Mixergy and for this technology.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you look at across the UK, there's around 9 million hot water tanks residing in domestic cupboards. And that's not to speak of the commercial opportunity. You mentioned there are about 1.6 million commercial premises. Now, as I was saying earlier, we are routinely seeing periods of the day where there's so much wind on the system that you're having to curtail roughly 5 gigawatts. So what's 5 gigawatts? That's two very big nuclear power plants that have yet to come online. Hopefully they will soon. Um, so if you were to just capture 1 in 4 of the tanks installed in the UK over their life cycle, if you could get them converted to a smart hot water tank, you could make use of those huge surpluses that are rising today. And but it doesn't stop there because, with the move to heat pumps, getting intelligent hot water storage and intelligent system design around the heat pump and the hot water tank, you can start using the hot water tank as a heat battery to supplement the space heating, the need to be able to defrost the tank, the need to avoid the heat pump short cycling, whilst also providing hot water. You can use surplus solar PV. So when we've been talking about these large surpluses that lead to wind being curtailed, that's one thing. The other massive change that's happening in the UK with respect to flexibility is you now have regulations around new build, which is going to mandate that 40% of the ground floor area of a new home has to be repeated on the roof as solar panels. So these are large solar arrays, often exceeding 3 kilowatts. With that huge amount of surplus solar energy, distribution networks are going to struggle. And we're already seeing situations where distribution network engineers are turning up to new build sites and saying, look, sorry, you're going to have to curtail this PV that you've installed. We're going to put an export limit on every inverter because the grid locally can't cope, or the power network, I should say, can't cope. So why not have a smart hot water tank in that context that is able to utilize what would otherwise be curtailed from the roof, whilst also being able to use surplus energy from the wider grid rather than paying wind farms to turn off when it's too windy. So, and that is just writ large in the commercial sector, where you have tanks that can be as large as 10,000 liters, and so that's a new frontier that we've embarked upon on our spec journey as well.
Okay, so have you essentially, has the mission changed since you started the company? Clearly, the journey has evolved and the company's evolved, but has the mission remained the same from your perspective?
I would say so, yeah. I think the idea of getting that interaction between the home and the grid and focusing on hot water as a pragmatic first step uh, has and remains the fundamental mission. Along the way, we've had to adapt commercially to get to scale. We've had to also work within an evolving ecosystem of other products that are vying for surplus solar energy or cheap electricity. And in a world where in some homes that's morphing into a home energy management system, how do you technically engage in that ecosystem? It's a really interesting challenge, but our place within it still has remained around smart hot water storage.
Yeah. Yeah, and how then does this evolution of Mixergy to continue, Pete? What do the next few years look like if things go pretty much to plan, or at least in the same direction of the plan?
Yeah, so we're laying good foundations. We're in specification with some of the biggest house builders across the UK. So we're seeing volume repeatably going into those channels, which is fantastic. And we've also got a really exciting pipeline around commercial hot water tanks, and that's fantastic because we can sell through M&E contractors, and we can manage that channel in a way that's much more scalable, we think, than over the counter. That being said, over the counter regular replacement of tanks and homes through licensing, if we can get that licensing model right, then that for us would be a great additional frontier. Um, Within the spec world, as mentioned earlier, we're having to operate with other systems, and with some social housing and new build customers, uh, we've been charged with the lead system architect role, and that's been really interesting because it's given us insight into the knotty challenges of how you reconcile air quality with surplus PV, with hot water storage, and with the need to provide for electric charging in new developments. So that's giving us a really insight into the role that we might play as we continue to evolve. But that's still very much in the R&D tech background for us. The mainstay for us today remains smart hot water tanks, and so I think hopefully that will still be looking good when we next come to talk to you in 2030, 32 or 33 or whenever it is.
We'll get that in the plan.
I'm struggling to add 8 to 6 this morning. We should have having this call a bit early.
Yeah, we'll get it in the diary. So the other thing you touched on this before, actually, by the way, and there are sort of, I guess, at least some similarities in another partner I've worked with in the past, which is Naked Energy, and the connection point, apart from the fact it's water orientated and thermal, was Barclays, which I know have been really supportive to them, and from our conversations of what you touched on before, as a partner rather than purely as a source of cash. They seem to have really helped the business. Perhaps you can share a little bit about investors generally, but perhaps how Barclays have supported, because they're not necessarily the name that springs to mind when people look to grow a
Yeah,
startup.
no, but Barclays is, I think that, that idea of them as a partner over and above being an investor is very much true. Barclays have really opened up the commercial opportunities for us in large buildings uh, throughout the UK, but also in other jurisdictions. I mean, you mentioned Naked Energy, and we really have on our agenda some conversations to have with them because there's some fantastic projects they're involved with. We've been specified across some large iconic commercial buildings. I don't think I'm allowed to talk about them yet because they haven't officially been announced, these projects, but where we're embedded within stadiums and historic buildings. But we're seeing Naked Energy also with very large solar thermal arrays in big commercial buildings. And Barclays in the middle, I think they've got a real long-term view around this space and really embody, I think, for us that patient capital, which is very mission oriented and that has genuine strategic value. I mean, the space that we've operated in with respect to raising capital has it's been around the venture side, and a lot of there is a lot of clean tech VC funding out there. But when you have a player like Barclays who have uh, deep commercial relationships through their banking arm, which also has a green mandate, which also links climate risk
Right.
to investment strategies, that opens up a whole bunch of opportunities that we're really just scraping the surface of. So it's been great to have Barclays on board. They've been an excellent partner.
Pete, how have you enjoyed? Because clearly at heart you're a techie nerd, or add, which is I say it as a plus and a positive. But obviously you've come from, and you still wear that CTO hat. So you clearly love, and you've been involved in the evolution of the product from its genesis and through to where it is now. But then we've already talked primarily around this commercial journey of learnings over that period of time, and which, I guess, challenges and parts of the journey have you enjoyed most and least, perhaps?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, if I think I've enjoyed learning about the complexity of commercial channels and how and it's given me an appreciation, frankly, for just regular businesses. When you look like a regular brand on the high street, like Greg's or something, you know, it's easy to sort of just take it for granted. But behind every one of those successful businesses is an exquisite machine that is very sophisticated and very easy uh, to fail to appreciate until you try and build something yourself. And I think, that doesn't mean I've always enjoyed it. It's been at times painful. I mean, for managing a sales team, that comes with its own complexity. Managing incentives within a commercial team, formulating a proposition with a particular target market where you've really excavated what the size of that opportunity is, the messaging that lands best. Those things I've enjoyed learning about. My comfort zone is technology, and so getting people in who are better at those commercial frontiers has been essential. But I have learned, the hard way, that there's much more to there's much more to businesses than just common sense plus spreadsheets. I think when I was doing my engineering degree, we had a mandatory business module. And
Okay.
it was this is just a spreadsheet with some basic arithmetic. It's like, no, it's a balance sheet. Oh, right, okay. And then actually you start to appreciate that at scale, these things are exquisite machines which are every bit as complex as a highly engineered product, to be honest, if not more so.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good analogy. Obviously, along the way, I've met with a number, and you've got a great team. We've touched on it a little bit at the board level, which really supports you. But you've around you also you've got co-founders initially, and a great team, marketing, commercial. So what's the culture like? When I first came to visit you, we touched on this when we spoke recently. There was a drum kit in the bathroom. There was a very small little. Really was a cottage industry, and obviously that's now clearly evolved. But perhaps you can share a little bit about the culture and the team.
Well, yeah, I mean, you say cottage industry. I mean, because literally they were and they remain cottages that were converted. They were actually holiday cottages, which were then turned into commercial units for various reasons. And so culturally, I mean, we're on a farm, and we have expanded within the same footprint that we originally started with. I think farming has its own culture, which I like to identify with. There's a sort of slight renegade, innovative spirit that you find amongst eccentric farmers, and I think that's kind of underpins some of our innovative ideals. I think, being and so we have various labs, shipping containers that we've turned into climate chambers, and we have large PV arrays, which I'm not sure if they've been approved by the distribution network operator, but we're on a farm, so it's fine. we probably couldn't do half the stuff that we get away with on an industrial estate with a property management business looking over our shoulder. But so culturally, we try to retain that curious agility, but at the same time, we've had to bring in a more commercial mindset, a more sort of to have the kind of rigor that you need to deliver something at scale. You can't just spend your time toying around with ideas on a farm. Although that still remains important and part of our DNA.
Yeah. So it's interesting to return the conversation because we're almost out of time. But I've been reading a book recently, which is Alchemy by Rory Sutherland. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with
Mhm.
it, but alchemy is around
I
still.
am familiar with Rory Sutherland. In
Yeah,
fact, I think I listened to the audio version of Alchemy. Marketing guy, right?
yeah, exactly. Just the
Yeah, it's
way
great.
to and psychology essentially of how being quirky or different is important to achieving results, particularly on a commercial front. But yeah, just that mindset of still being a little bit you refer to as renegade or
I remember there's a great quote from him where he talked about HS2, and he said that HS2 was an engineer's solution to a transport problem, and he said you should have got marketeers to solve that problem because they would have just, I think he said, would have got supermodels and to carry champagne down the carriages of regular trains, and then people would pay to slow them down, and you would have saved hundred. And he came up with all this back of the envelope stuff around how many tens of billions would have been saved by just taking more of a marketing mindset than an engineering one, which
yeah, the
it was
lateral.
really good. Yeah.
Yeah, a lateral thought. So then on that again, you've had quite a journey, and you've learned from. You've already touched on there. A great board, some great investors, and a great team around you. Sort of referring back to the book side of things, we touched on before. Have you one or two recommendations or books that have really, I guess, supported or challenged you in the journey?
Oh yeah, tons. I mean, I'm a real bookworm. I mean, you met Rory Sutherland related to that theme, predictably irrational. Don't know if you've come across
No,
that
I
book.
haven't.
It's more consumer psychology, but it really captures some of the evolutionary baggage we have in our psychology, which leads us to make different decisions. And we think of ourselves as rational economic actors, but actually there are a whole bunch of weird things that marketeers can exploit, sometimes nefariously. But another book I really enjoyed was one called The Ideas Factory, which is about Bell Labs. It's a history of Bell Labs. And so, we think of the tech giants today like Google and um, OpenAI and Microsoft, but they were nothing in some respects to Bell back in the 1920s to 30s when they were, rolling out transatlantic cables, inventing the laser, inventing the transistor, and what I liked about that book was the attention that Bell Labs paid to even the design of their buildings to make sure people would interact sort of serendipitously. So they'd have these long corridors where people were forced to walk past every department before they got to the canteen. And it's a really interesting to think that people thought like that even back then. But yeah, predictably irrational and ideas factory, I think, are two pretty good ones. Yeah. How long
Cool.
have you got?
Yeah, we could be well. So no, I'll put links to those in the episode notes for the publication. But yeah, the marketing spin one is really interesting. Bell Labs, of course, also inventors of PV, or certainly the initial sort of behind PV for
Yeah, I mean,
television.
the semiconductor, the whole sort of the genesis of semiconductors. Yeah, they are, yeah, quite a formidable power around everything we take for granted today.
Yeah, no, that'd be interesting to read again. Just around innovation, like so some things which seem just so counterintuitive to. I think there's a guy called Tony Isaiah who was the founder of. Name's gone now. He's one. He did quite well, but he talked about collisions, just creating environments where people would bump into each other, and
Okay.
from those collisions, like water cooler moments, whatever you want to call them, but you could
Yeah,
get
yeah.
environments where people would collide and just have these serendipitous conversations that
Hmm.
would be really innovative. So, yeah, something which isn't necessarily um, logical thinking in terms of what's the best use of space, but actually creating environments where people spark is a yeah a creator of opportunity and a creator of ideas.
Yeah. No, it's yeah, those moments that you can't. And the challenge with that sort of thinking is it's not easy to. You can't put that sort of thing on a balance sheet, right? It's part of your sort of human capital, nebulous cultural artifacts, which it's worth investing in, but it's hard for people to directly measure the output of that sort of thing. But it seems, at least in the case of Bell Labs, to genuinely pay dividends.
To be game changing, yeah, absolutely. So just to close, so Mixergy for the next evolution, there's going to be at some point in the near future some nice big announcements of projects that are going to have Mixergy as the sort of the core of their being from an energy perspective. Anything else that we'll look to see in the next year or two that we should be looking out for?
Yeah, so I mean, within the specification world, we are having to work with other systems. And because I mentioned earlier that in order to bring a smart tank to market, we had to build an IoT platform. So we built that in-house, and we built it in such a way that it would be lower cost to scale. And by lower cost, I mean lower cost than, say, using something from Amazon Web Services or Microsoft Azure. With that, we have opportunities, particularly within likes of social housing, to take the opportunity when installing a Mixergy tank to more optimally control other key energy assets in the home, whether that's a storage heater or part of the ventilation system linked to air quality measurement, whilst also keeping an eye on the tariff. So we launched a beta trial a few weeks ago of a system called Tariff Engine. And the objective behind that is to make sure that a Mixergy tank always works most effectively with the best available tariff for the household. And sometimes it's not obvious which tariff that should be. It's very confusing. So really the opportunity centers around how we can augment the capability of our product with the software behind it to really drive the specification proposition that we have, particularly for social housing. So that's because we have Mixergy tanks going in as part of an energy retrofit with a heat pump or with some high retention storage heaters. It's for just a little bit more just a little bit more thinking, you can get that system with the right tariff integrated with dynamic air quality control, so you're getting the right balance between comfort, energy efficiency, and compliance risks like mold. So those are the kind of germinating themes that in the next couple of years hopefully should be growing into something more material.
Evolving. Brilliant. Well, thanks for sharing the journey. For those listening, I will share the original link to the podcast from 2018 and, of course, the links that we just referred to there. But thanks, Pete, for sharing this update on Mixergy version 2, and look forward to some of those big announcements.
Thanks for having us back on, David. And look forward to the next time we can come back.